Thank you so much, Alan. As I begin, first, my gratitude to many of you who attended the Design Thinking Workshop. For me personally, it was an absolutely amazing experience to listen to your stories, particularly the stories of your students, of their struggle and how they're overcoming them. I was incredibly impressed by the heart you brought to solving the student success puzzle. The work, the journeys that you outlined in those sessions are really, for me, very thoughtful, and I want to just thank you for that experience. As I begin, I want to thank Alan and Sadie for the invitation, to Bill and Kresge Foundation for the opportunity to be here. My name is Sukhwant Jhaj. I'm a designer and an architect, and at Portland State University, which is one of the largest universities in the state of Oregon, has about 28,000 students. I lead the efforts around academic innovation, academic planning, and student success. I'd love to talk to you today about some of our work, but keep in mind that I am, in the end, a designer. I know how to stack bricks on bricks to build a building, and that's where my expertise comes from. My current work focuses on mobilizing an organization, an institution, to focus on innovation and student success. And I bring some of the practices from my academic discipline, my academic training to that work, and I'm going to share my work from the point of view of a practitioner more than anything else. And I hope you would find value in it. The complexity with which you are dealing with here is at a completely different level than what I experience daily in my work, and that has been a really intriguing part of my learning experience. But as a designer, one of the things I believe in is that you solve the problems in the context in which you exist. So design is very much a contextual activity for me, and yesterday, in one of the keynotes, you learned about some of the context in which we are working on. So there's no surprise that the first slide is quite similar to one of the slides you saw in yesterday's presentation. But for me personally, the slide pretty much outlines one of the biggest challenges and ethical challenges we face in public education in America. It is clear that we are making progress in improving student success in the country. The people who are successful in our universities typically come from the highest or the second highest income quartiles as such. I mean, data on this is very clear. But when we look at the bottom, we're making little or no progress. So think about this for a minute. Over a span of almost, I would say, 50 years, the bottom has moved from 6% to 11, 6 percentage gain, and the top from 40 to 58%. Significant difference in academic achievement, and we have designed our ecosystem to serve a certain kind of student. So that, to me, is contextually one of the bigger design problems that we have to solve. Secondly, in the student success realm, there's a lot of focus on degree completion and retention and persistence. And if you look at the universities with some of the highest persistence rates in the country, there typically are the Ivies, in this case, the Ivy Plus. But one of the things that drives completion, and again, the data on this is very clear, are the financial challenges the students face and the resources that are available to the organizations. This comes from the work of Raj Shetty at Stanford, that at Ivy Plus, the number of students who come from the top 1% of income earners exceeds the number of students that come from the bottom 50% of the country. The top 1% earns more than $380,000 a year. So again, in terms of designing and student success as we talk about it, at least in the American context, it is quite important to be mindful of how do we conceptualize success. If you focus excessively on ratios, then it's clear the winners are already in some ways decided. But if you look at sort of a basic piece of data, in our case, I work at Portland State University, and graduation is this weekend. We'll probably graduate about 4,800 undergraduate students. That is more than the number of undergraduates graduated by Harvard, Princeton, and Yale combined. So then the question is, who are you serving? How are you serving them? And how do we measure success? Pretty useful thing to keep in mind, again, in terms of context setting. The third thing I want to talk about briefly is about the tuition and fee increases in America. Again, you saw some version of this information. It's laid out from 87 to 88 to pretty much this year. The tuition, and I work at a public institution, has gone up by almost 3.13 times over this time frame. And the income of the families has gone up by only 18%. So it's clear that much of the burden of this disinvestment in higher education in America is borne by the students and their families. And in terms of a design challenge, this is a significant design challenge that we face in designing our ecosystem. So just looking at the experience of students, we are not serving certain segments of our population. Retention and student success, if thought of as simply ratios, is deeply connected with family income, and the cost of higher education is rapidly increasing. So this is the student experience on one hand. And we talk about this often. But what is the faculty and staff experience? How are they doing in our universities? And this comes from some of the work. The survey was published in Inside Higher Ed. The study was done by Gallup. Only 34% of faculty and staff members are engaged in the work of the institution. And so there's actively engaged, they're disengaged, and then there is this category of actively disengaged. And you know what that feels like from your own experiences in your staff meetings probably. But majority of the people are in the middle. So bottom, actively disengaged is 18, but there's a large number of faculty and staff members in American universities who are really not engaged in the work of the institutions. We hear stories about, in our discussions over the last 2 days about how, as faculty, we turn off certain things, the work of the institution, we focus on what we have to do in our classes, in our labs, or in our studios, and what happens at administrative levels or initiatives, those things we are disengaged with. So some of that disengagement looks like that. It's not that they're unhappy, but they're not in some way vested in the agenda itself. This is something really useful to keep in mind as such. Universities among the least engaged workplaces in the world. So we talk a lot about student success. We need to also think about faculty and staff success as we move forward. So college and universities, again, I'm bringing it from Gallup. College and university employees rank right around the bottom quartile of learn and grow measures. So we are in the business of teaching and learning. Are we creating organizations that people are actively engaged in learning? And here, partly about learning the business of the organization itself, the work we do. According to this, clearly not. Only 4 out of 10 higher education staff and faculty strongly agree that in the past year they have opportunities to work to learn and grow. So why is this important? If you want to fundamentally change things, you cannot have faculty and staff that are disengaged, and the organization that is focused on learning also has to be a learning organization. At least within the context in which I work, this is one of the things that's defining the problems that we are trying to address. So then, I'm trying to make here a case of redesign, and in some cases, also of designing from scratch. What we have doesn't work for our students, and I would argue to some degree, it doesn't work for our faculty and staff. And we have to be actively engaged in this work of redesigning our organizations and designing our organizations for tomorrow's students in today's institutions. Which brings me to the work of the designers. So if what we face in front of us is this design challenge, then wouldn't it be useful to think a little bit about how designers think and work? So what is design thinking? And I wouldn't give you a scholarly definition of it. I'm trained as a designer. I studied for years design and architecture. What we are arguing here for is taking the ways of thinking that comes from design and applying them to problem solving. As a designer, I work a lot with social scientists and take ways of learning that comes from those domains in solving the student success puzzle. And what I'm arguing for here, making a case for, is taking things from how designers think and work and applying them to how you solve problems. This is one more way in which you can solve the problems that you face. I'm not arguing exclusively or solving problems in this fashion. So then how do designers think and work? If the project is to design and redesign, how do designers think and work? And I have discussed some of this in the design thinking workshop, but I'll very much like to highlight that one more time. We think visually, we draw, but the focus of the drawing is really to draw things out, to make them visible. So that is very much a practice of our work. And as somebody who leads change, making things visible is really a powerful thing. A report, the text you write is hidden away, the drawings you make are visible to people. And for us, making of the artifacts, I'll give you some examples, have been one of the ways in which we have built the community around change. So we work with large number of people, almost 100 sometimes, to create a single drawing. And in the act of making that drawing, we build a community together and we seek agreement and draw out what the community is feeling. So drawing for us is fundamentally a very important thing. Then the second thing we focus on is the student experience. So we place students at the heart of the design thinking process. We are used to thinking about students in segments, and what I'm arguing for is actually thinking about them as individuals. We follow their journey. So what is their experience as they move from wherever they are to the institutions and the organizations that we have built? We design with people, not for people. I think this is an important distinction even for designers. As an architect, I was trained to actually design for people. But really the focus of design thinking is to designing with people, opening up the space in which thinking is taking place about building solutions and bringing people into the design process. There's an obsessive focus on execution, how to actually translate the ideas that are coming from the people you're working with and turn them into projects, products, processes, and change. When you bring people together and ask them for their ideas, you're also making a commitment to realizing those ideas. Because if you don't do that, you lose faith over time. And I think as a design practitioner, that is something you almost can't do within your organization. So we are deeply committed in our work to focus on execution. And I have found this idea of designing things in a very open and transparent way as a way of managing change within the organization. So thinking like a designer, we draw, we focus on experience of people, of individuals, we think about their journey, we think mostly in terms of their transition, we design with people, they're part of the teams, we focus obsessively on execution, and we use much of this to manage change in our organizations. We bring people along as we do this work. I want to introduce this idea of design value chain. These are some of the concepts and constructs that we are playing around with in our work. And I offer these largely as propositions more than anything else. So you can doubt them, you can challenge them. Maybe some of them are probably even incorrect, but they are at this stage driving some of our work. Those of you who have background in business and service design, this idea would look familiar to you. It comes from the work of Braxton and Doyle. of service value chain. And those of you who are interested, actually from Haskett and Sasser, and those of you who are looking at student success literature, we are looking really of student success for non-traditional students, the framework developed by Braxton. Essentially, the argument here is that the student success is driven by student engagement and commitment. This comes from Braxton. That those things are driven by the quality of services being offered. So the service experience of students dealing with the services that exist within the organization and their academic experience. The quality of service experience is largely driven by employee success and productivity, which is driven by employee engagement. And employee engagement is driven by institutional service and quality. So their institutional service and quality, again, a number of things are at work there: design of work, design of the workplace, and design of the tools people use at work. And student engagement and commitment is driven by design and delivery of the services to meet students' need. All of this work, student success, at least for us, if we fail in that work, we would see very quick results for institutional success, for our resources, and for our reputation. We are under enormous enrollment pressures in the state in which I live. And one of the ways in which we can be successful is if we learn how to serve students we are currently not serving. And for that, we need to build capacity to serve that student population. So our ability to develop and redesign our system is deeply tied to building services for new segments of students. For example, adult learners who have dropped out, students who have never thought about going to college, students we are not currently serving. But if we are successful in that work, we would gain in terms of institutional sources, institutional resources and reputation. So that's one of the constructs that is guiding our work. The second thing that is guiding much of the design thinking work, and I'll share with you some examples, is this notion that comes from Francis Fry. He's a faculty member at Harvard, that design excellence, or service excellence actually, or excellence in general, is driven by design and culture. That culture is a really important part of any drive for institutional transformation. So we focus, it's easy to deploy new software systems, it's easy to deploy new analytics systems, but if you've not focused on the cultural aspects of it, you're almost sort of bound to fail in that case. And then even in some cases, by having strong culture and low technology or low-tech designs, you can actually get really outstanding results, and there are a lot of examples of that. So as a construct, that's really important to us. And the third big idea that we work with in our work is this notion of ambidexterity. Again, comes from the work of O'Reilly and Tushman. Professor O'Reilly is at Stanford, Tushman at Harvard. But it really focuses on how do you deal with solutions, how do you develop solutions in a disruptive space. Now, let me explain what this idea means. Ambidexterity largely implies that you have to solve two problems simultaneously as a designer if you are interested in the work of transformation. And that is, your organization must be successful in the short run while it is solving problems for the long run. And it seems like a fairly simple construct, but it is incredibly difficult to practice. Majority of the transformation efforts fail because they fail to look at one or the other of these dimensions. They focus on big ideas that take years to accomplish, but they do not deliver short-term results, and the leaders fail in that regard and do not have those positions anymore, and the project fails. Or they focus too narrowly on short-term and do not focus on the long-term, and again, the similar kind of failure exists. So the notion of ambidexterity has been playing itself out in some really important ways in our works at Portland State. Which brings me to the project itself. So I've shared with you a little bit of background as a designer. The big ideas that we talk about and think through and are providing the intellectual framework that guides our work. About 5 years ago, we began with a project called Rethink PSU. And the goal, I would see, probably would appeal to you, to deliver an education that serves more students with better outcomes while containing cost through curricular innovation, community engagement, and effective use of technology. The motto of our university is "Let knowledge serve the city." We are deeply connected with our city, Portland, and the focus on community engagement is driven by that motto. And the first project which we did as part of Rethink PSU was called Provost Challenge. So it, in some ways, gets us to the heart of how do you solve problems. If you want to redesign the systems that we are part of, and clearly, at least in the American context, it is not that difficult, as you saw, to make a case for redesign. I would argue that you have to change the way in which you solve problems. If you want different results, you can't solve the problems the way you have been always solving over the last 50 years. The results are pretty consistent in America. If you keep on doing that, the outcomes won't change. And in our case, we took a very different approach to problem solving. We went directly to our faculty and staff members. How did we do that? We used techniques like crowdsourcing. So we built a very simple platform, cost maybe $4,000 or $5,000, built in-house, which allowed all our faculty and staff members to propose ideas for changing the organization. The role of the administrators in this case was to facilitate the process and lay out some, provide some directional cues. We identified thematically 3 large areas in which we sought ideas from our faculty and staff members. We focused on what we called 3 different ways of innovating. In one case, how do you combine 2 things to create a third one? So how do you take a collection of courses and create new programs? Very simple, very architectural in nature. The second one was more significant breakthrough ideas, competency-based education. We have never done that in our case. How do you do that? And the last one was small ideas with huge impact, so changes in processes, etc. And when we began this work, it was quite surprising to me personally that our leaders in the institution agree to problem solve in a very different way, to not follow the typical process. So how do we solve problems? And I'll offer you a caricature of how we do that sometimes. Few people in a small conference room in a tall building somewhere come up with an idea. And then once they've decided what to do, at least in America, they turn around and say, how do we get buy-in from our faculty and staff members? And that is really, in my mind, a big driver of the disengagement you see on campuses. People are not engaged in problem solving because they truly do not have an honest way of engaging with the question as such. So just flipping it on its head and taking it to our faculty and staff members directly was, I would say, somewhat of an accidental insight. I'm surprised still that we did that, but it had a profound impact on our institution. I am a pretty optimistic guy. So I thought maybe we would get, 40 some ideas. My boss at that time, the provost, not so much. She saw 30. My colleague, who focuses on finance, is a chemist. He thought 20 people 20 big ideas will come out of it. But really, what we experienced was something unlike any of us expected. We had 1,000 of our faculty and staff members participate in this idea generation process. Over 160 ideas were proposed, and we funded 24 of them. So let me just walk you through that process in case you want to deploy them in your organization. The barrier to entry was really small. All you needed when you were beginning was the title of the project and a paragraph. And I know as faculty members it's difficult sometimes to just limit yourself to a paragraph, but it was a good start. And the only requirement was that you had to have one other person working with you. The website we had built, the tool we had built, allowed for the ideas to be posted publicly. That was quite novel, but what it did was it allowed everybody to make a public commitment in the company of somebody else to doing something. And I think that's really important, this notion of public commitment. Now, we are used to peer review, but we are not used to peer review in that open a way from our faculty members, from our staff members, and from our students. Anybody in the institution can see the idea and comment on it. It was a tagging system we invented. Very easy, people could add tags, but it allowed for the entire organization to begin to collect ideas together. And so teams were formed very, very quickly. This level of sophistication and proposing ideas moved up with every level of the proposal design. But we never asked our faculty for how much money they would need. No budgets were to be submitted as part of the process. It is largely so that we can focus their time and energy in their area of expertise. We wanted their ideas. We had analysts who could prepare the budget when the time came. Then the public presentations took place, where all the faculty and staff members got a chance to present ideas to their peers. It took 3 days. And we clustered the idea together so the people who were thinking about similar things could hear each other talk. And the end result was further consolidation from these 162 ideas to really robust interdisciplinary teams in the organization. And we funded 24 of them. So what's intriguing about this is as we were doing these things and the kinds of ideas that were proposed, we're building of large-scale programs, deploying new technology like e-portfolios and so on. In terms of the institutional capacity, we were at a place where we were designing 20 to 25 courses at a time. Our Center for Academic Excellence was about 20 years old at that time, and Center for Online Learning did work on digital technology separately. We lacked the institutional capacity to realize the ideas our faculty and staff members were proposing. And the end result was creating this Office of Academic Innovation. So I go back to the challenge I outlined earlier. Having a process that engages people is not enough. You have to create those space and that platform from which they can learn and learn consistently. So this is the work of Office of Academic Innovation. It focuses on high impact practices. We believe we teach across a continuum of technology. We no longer focus on online only or face-to-face only. Any faculty member can come to this center and work in this sort of wide use of tool. So it's not a separate place for hybrid or online or face-to-face. They can embed community-based learning as part of this work. Our work is focused on adult and non-traditional learners. So as our population is more or less flat in the state, one of the only ways in which the university can grow is if it serves adult students. So who are adult students? These are students who had dropped out of the university. So we have to build programs that allow people who have done some college education and have dropped out to come back to college. And that's really the project that we have been working on. Digital is new reality for us. We call them flexible degrees. Faculty are actively working on this work. So from Provost Challenge, we build this capacity to largely just seek ideas from our community. Now we are at a place where we can build 5 to 7 new programs every year. There are 11 programs currently in progress. 10 are proposed for the coming year. Email announcing this will go out on Monday when I'm back in town in Portland, and we are about to build our first competency-based degree. We have grants that focus on adaptive courseware and et cetera, but that's not really sort of the thing that I would focus on. So engaging faculty and building platforms for their ongoing engagement and success, I think, is crucial to this work of transformation. In terms of projects, we have sort of 2 broad clusters. One focuses on the work of academic redesign, and the second one around student success. And I'll focus much of my time on the work next around what we are doing around student success. So one big lesson came from our failure from Provost Challenge. So clearly we did well when it came to engaging our faculty and staff members. Over 1,000 of them engaged. We failed miserably in engaging our students. And the realization was, if this is where you can get to, if you can activate your faculty and staff member, where will you go? We asked ourselves, if you could really truly engage your students in rethinking your organization. And that has been our work over the last 4 years, once the project for Provost Challenge moved forward. We asked our students what's working and what's not working for them, particularly around student services. And the response for them was very clear, very, very clear. Our advising system did not work for them. And it's really powerful to have a group of students and your advisors in the room. Everybody's advisors are deeply dedicated to their work, but to hear that was quite challenging. Students find it challenging to get non-academic business done at the university. It is very difficult, and we primarily serve first-generation students. We have one of the most diverse populations in the state. Finding services is difficult. So your institution might have services, but if you need to know how a university is organized to access the services, you would not go to them if you are a first-generation student, or in general, you don't know how to seek help in that kind of context. Systems and communications feel disjointed and duplicative. So I've heard this idea of different services existing at the same time in the organization. We were no different in this space. Too many different systems that don't talk to each other, parallel programs that exist within colleges and sometimes within departments within a college to solve the same problem. Students are using mobile tools, they didn't exist. And students want access to resources, business, and important information on a mobile device. They couldn't find that. So where the mindset of the institution was very different than where our students was. And it was very difficult to apply for scholarship. The first were, we understood, but the last one was, it kept on coming up from students repeatedly, and we have tried to highlight it within our organization. So this realization that these things didn't work became the basis for the next set of work we did. We worked with our students to conceptualize 4 big solutions that the institution will commit to realizing. The first one was Coordinated Service Network. The second one, we call it MyPSU, Interactive Degree Maps, and Advising Redesign. So those were the 4 big projects that the institution has committed its resources and time, and has led to large-scale sort of administrative reorganization. The ideas for them came from our students. And I'll just very quickly scan through that, but I want to share with you this graphic. Now, it is very difficult to see it from a distance, but on campus we use it quite often. And we use the making of this graphic to bring people together. So again, we build community around drawing, and this is one of those examples which we use to communicate what is it that we are doing. We work with a company called Explain. It's a studio based in Portland, and we receive funding from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to do this work. Very clearly, the current experience is confused. We want a more connected future experience. There are 4 projects, and we laid those out for our community. So this is our main tool on how we communicate our ideas within the institution and outside. And I'll talk about the outside part in a minute, because those questions came up in yesterday's keynotes. We talk about this design thinking process: discover, design, implement, and use. And the big circles you see, this drawing is a little bit, all kind of show where each project is at any time. So it's also a way of telling us where we are in making of the project. The breakdown of work in these categories is outlined, but more importantly, it also makes a commitment to co-creation. We work with people, and that value is communicated repeatedly. And this is something new. This is not how we solve problems, even in our organization before we began. So after crowdsourcing and Provost Challenge, we've been really pushing this way of thinking and working. And not only in the student services space, we have seen other divisions like our budget and planning division taking this way of working and working with faculty and staff members. In everything we do, we put students at the center, we hear every voice, and we work for the benefit of all. Now, these are very difficult values to practice, especially hearing every voice, when those voices are particularly critical of what the institution is doing or how we are problem solving. But it's a skill that we are trying very clearly to develop. One of our tasks is to set expectations of participations for each of the groups, for students, for those who provide student-facing services, and those who do the work. Because not everybody has a role in doing this work, but for each of these projects, we very clearly outline what is it that we are doing. I'd like the first video to be played, please. And it kind of shows you how these projects are interrelated in some ways. Thank you. Please play.
Congratulations! You made the smart choice to go to college. It's the best route to an outstanding education and career. But you have to juggle work and family, not to mention getting to campus, handling finances, and studying for exams. Talk about stress. With all that, it can be hard to see a clear path to your degree. At Portland State University, we hear you. We are working to help you get the most out of your experience. Here's how. First, you need to get the right advice. We're changing the way our academic advisors work with students like you. They help you stay on track from your first class at PSU until the day you graduate. That means one-on-one attention, regular check-ins, expert advice in your courses, as well as help with internships and career preparation. Second, you have a strong network of support working behind the scenes to help ensure your success. Whether you're registering for classes or visiting a financial aid counselor, they will help you cut through the red tape and make sure you are getting the courses and services you need. The personal touch is great, but let's be real. You rely on your phone and your computer to navigate your world. That's why we are updating My PSU into a one-stop destination for important information. Class schedules, alerts, deadlines, finances, all the details you need in one easy-to-use place, personalized just for you on your desktop or mobile device. And we are developing another important tool tailored to your needs. We call them interactive degree maps. They're designed to show you exactly what you need to finish your degree successfully, even if you change majors. Advising, support network, My PSU, degree maps. At Portland State University, we are turning college stress into college success.
Thank you. So again, the use of the video here is for a very specific purpose. We have gone to our students, we worked with hundreds of them to figure out what to do and what's not working. We have to very clearly tell them that we are acting on their behalf now. And again, from our side, it's a very public commitment that we will get these things done. So the video is available, at least was when we prepared it, on university's website. So it's a signaling device for the entire community that we will be working on these kinds of projects, and these ideas come from students. It's very easy to argue against ideas that come from administrators. It's very difficult in my experience to argue against ideas that are emerging from our students. The other thing that we have done is, in this particular illustration and some of the other things I'll share in a minute, we've used them quite effectively with our legislators. So in our system, when we are making our requests of funding to our state, the request begins with highlighting work like this. Last year, and I just presented to the Senate committees before coming here, we have highlighted the creative work we are doing in service of the students. And it has enormous traction from our legislators. So trying to communicate with them, at least for us, is very important. And we use images and illustrations that people can, hold in their hand and take away and understand to communicate our message. One of the second projects that we worked on, and I wanted to use this to just make the case that sometimes you have to actually change the organization of the institution to respond to needs that are emerging from our students. So projects are quite familiar to you at this stage. But as we launched this work, it was quite clear that we could not design or redesign the advising experience through just simply use of a software, like an analytics platform wouldn't do it. That it needed a significant change in the culture of the organization. And you couldn't lead large-scale cultural change in this context because a total fragmentation of the administrative structure. Advisors were part of different programs across the institution, and they were overseen by different supervisors, and each of these offices had its own culture, etc. So for about 2 months, the academic leadership worked on this project without any really large-scale discussion across the campus. And it was partly done because we didn't want to get into a situation where ideas and design emerge from our faculty and staff, and our deans and provosts and presidents are unwilling to then act on it. Instead, in this case, we asked them to set a set of goals that can then be taken to our faculty and our staff to design a system that will respond to it, and to our students. And 4 goals were established. One was one-on-one advising. Every student at the institution would have one advisor they can go to, somebody who knows them. Unify the advising framework, that we would create an administrative framework, and didn't say it was centralized at that stage, that allows us to manage the unit, that we would have work as a source of joy as one of the goals of our work, and increase students' self-efficacy and sense of agency. We are resource poor. Our students need to do some of this work on their own. And, we communicated pretty early with our faculty and staff using these 2 images as to what we are doing. So these are artifacts that were used to communicate to the faculty and staff. And in the end, much of our work focused on creating this particular image. There's a huge report that also goes with it. But publicly, this image captures much of our work. And we will bring people together to actually work on different aspects of the image. It focused on what is the advising structure. On the left, how would it be administratively organized? So it's no longer organized based on college. We use the flow of students, how they move across the university to create the administrative structure. The data analytics work we did allowed us to build an administrative structure that follows the flow of students across the institution, not the organization of the university based on faculties, etc. And that was a pretty important shift, but we could go there and propose that because the deans had already agreed. We mapped all the activities that take place in the student advising. When we realized that there are 140 different activities that were taking place across all the offices. And we've reduced it down to 5 critical experiences. Because you can't build community or manage quality unless there is this kind of consistency. And they are really, if you think about it, really no-brainers. When a student comes in, they'll have an advisor. They will meet with them in their first quarter, ideally. And they will be tasked with declaring a major. If they cannot declare a major, they'll be part of a pathway. That's sort of the part 1 of it. As they move forward, there will be a conversation about your major. Students change major, and it's pretty easy in our context. And that delays their graduation, so we want to take that problem on. Have a career conversations. In our context, this was culturally very difficult. Some people believed in career counseling as a part of advising roles, some didn't. And students pushed us to also focus on financial conversation as well, planning conversation, that was added. And really, at the very end, one more meeting with your academic advisors to make sure you've done everything to graduate. Very simple. People can do all other kinds of variations, but everybody who's doing advising is committing to doing that, and everybody is now part of the same administrative structure, so the opacity that exists on what work you're doing is gone. Similarly, a focus on advisors' responsibility and advisors' role. What are the things that are coming in the way of advisors actually enjoying their work and systematically working through those? So that was our advising proposal. I'm pleased to say it was approved, that we received about $1 million to hire more people. Some of the money came from state because they really were excited about this work. And then we worked for about 5 months with our union to make sure that we can do these things. We work in a unionized environment. I would like to play another video which talks about yet another tool that we are building. But before we do that, it's the problem this tool solves is a uniquely American problem. That is of this excess of choice. Students can change majors, so there are 110 different majors degrees that you can move through, and there are really thousands of courses you can choose from. And they make mistakes when they're doing that, and the curriculum itself is quite complex. So how do you solve that problem? And that emerged clearly as one of the big ideas from our students. And we tried to do this work on our own. We failed miserably. And then because it just required a lot more money than we had. And we have now set up a public-private partnership with Barnes & Noble to build this tool for national use. So it can be used by hundreds of thousands of students across the country. And we will share in the profit of use of this tool and direct it towards our student success work. Could you please play it? So there's a little bit of a silence at the beginning so I could talk. And really, students have been involved pretty early in the design of the tool. They were quite critical. We use a degree audit system. I don't know if you have those or need them.
The first screen we are looking at is what we call My Degree Plans. It shows the student the list of all of the plans. Let's open the BA in Finance. When viewing the plan, projected graduation date is front and center. The student has three views. Course plan gives a list of courses by academic year and term. It includes details about the courses, detailed descriptions, credit information, and to which course group it might belong to, like Sync or Language. It also takes into account course history and transfer information. It also simplifies the selection of prerequisites. Because knowing how to pay for your degree is essential, the student gets a status on their financial aid eligibility for that given degree. Measuring progress is key as well. Degree requirements shows progress as a timeline, viewing your GPA, and status on other requirements. From here, the student can edit the plan, send it to an advisor, or compare plans. When comparing plans, the student gets a simple table comparing the plan against several metrics.
First opinion on this is that it's really well laid out, and for me, because I like being held accountable, I do feel like it's easy for me to reach my goals, achieve my goals, because it does hold me accountable. I get to visually see where I'm at.
I really like the tool because it shows you like what classes you need to be taking. If you need like prerequisites for a class, it gives you options of class you should be taking, and it gives you the projected year you're going to graduate, how many credits you need. I think it's like a really like good tool because it really breaks down everything that you need to do to graduate. Thanks.
So I changed my major from electrical engineering to finance.
Okay.
And
Yep.
I didn't have anything to really compare to see like, oh, this is what the prereqs are left. This is how many credits I need to graduate. But immediately the first thing I thought of with this system is like, man, if I could have compared these, I wonder if it would have helped me to make a decision easier. Actually, it would help me to make a decision easier. So I feel like it's pretty useful. Yeah, I think it's a great tool, actually.
Let's compare this one with this one. Oh.
Boo.
Stop. This is so cool. Time to graduation. Average credits per term. Oh, wow. That's so cool.
So that was a test of sort of a pre-beta version of the tool. We'll be testing it with 30 students by end of July in School of Business, and then we'll be launching it to the rest of the students in the university. Which brings me to pretty much the end of presentation. I shared with you a practitioner's view of solving problems that we face in our context, some of our initiatives, how we have tried to work and think through them. Our results are pretty interesting. We have built the capacity now to design or redesign between 5 to 7 new programs. The growth in those programs and others in online learning has now created a space where we have about $50 million to our bottom line as a result from both state funding and online enrollments, while we see decline in traditional students as such. Our graduation rates over the last 7 years have gone up by over 14%. And in general, I would argue that faculty are far more engaged in a very authentic way in the work. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I really want to thank you for this time.